Mr. Oliver Tan, President of the Singapore Industrial Automation Association, Aloysius Orlando, CEO of SingX, Mr. Tan Guang Hong, I think you're here as well, Mr. Colin Koh, Mr. Adrian Seng, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish you all a very good morning. I hope you are prepared that whenever you take the risk of inviting me, you end up with a slightly unpredictable presentation. But this is the internet era, so I think you have to be ready for the unpredictable stuff. This is our 50th anniversary of Singapore's independence, and just over 2 weeks ago, we lost our founding Prime Minister. The genius of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, when Singapore achieved involuntary independence and got cut off, was to make us a global city before globalization became fashionable, was to create a first world oasis with first world infrastructure before technology had rolled out to the rest of the region, was to create and empower a hardworking, disciplined, and educated workforce that were capable of working with multinational corporations before globalization became fashionable. Today, everyone wants to be a global city. Everyone wants to be a city that's open to talent. Everyone wants to welcome companies with new ideas, new technologies. Today, globalization and the information revolution is a reality. The point I'm making, the first point I want to make, is that you see, Singapore survived and thrived for 5 decades because Mr. Lee Kuan Yew anticipated this wave. Perhaps he was put into a position where he had no choice and had to anticipate this wave, but because we were ahead of the curve, we have achieved not inconsiderable success so far. So that's one point I wanted to leave with you. If you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution, which is only about 250 years old, there have been several waves, starting with transport, the canals in England, which enabled trade, the invention of the steam engine, electricity, ocean-going ships, refrigeration, and then for the audience in this room, sometime after the after the Second World War, the invention of the transistor, which really was the spark for the information revolution. The point I want to make is that every 50 years or so, a major breakthrough occurs in the technological field, which changes everything. Today, I think we're still about midway through the revolution that the information technological wave has spawned for all of us. If you look within that 50-year wave, and if you bring your microscope down into the IT revolution, and now look in terms of decades, I would say for most end users, consumers, most people got their first personal computer round about in the 80s, right? I mean, the early adopters, late 70s, but most people would have bought their first Apple or their first IBM PC in the 80s. And the PC revolution, has more or less peaked. I think if you do a count of all the personal computers sold in the world, it comes to about 2 billion or so. Maybe about 1 billion are still connected and functioning. That's in the 80s. If you move into the 90s, the next wave or sub-wave which affected end users was clearly the internet. The fact that our PCs were no longer just personal, but they could connect. Those of us old enough will remember even the sound of the modems. I think the younger people here will not remember them. But we will remember and it would wake up our spouses at odd times of the night because we were surfing. That was the 90s. If you move forward another 10 years, we really moved into the age of mobile communications, telephony. That takes us into the 90s, 2000. And then the secondary wave within that was smartphones. So I think today, if I ask you how many smartphones have been sold, I think the number is also about 2 billion or so. Right? It's in the couple of billion units sold. And the key difference between just having internet connectivity and having smartphones is the fact that now you are connected all the time, on the move, at a personal level. Well, for the audience here, the next wave is the Internet of Things. I probably don't need to convince all of you here. That's why you're all here, right? But I say this because maybe there will be civil servants or other people or managers who don't get it, and I'm trying to make them get it. That the next wave is the Internet of Things. And when you talk about the Internet of Things, I think the numbers which I previously cited, 2 billion personal computers, a couple of billion smartphones, get completely dwarfed by the numbers that the Internet of Things is going to generate. So maybe at this point, we should first give credit to Kevin Ashton, who way back in 1999 coined the term the Internet of Things. While preparing for this talk, the first thing I did, like what most of you would do, is go on internet and search what is the definition of the Internet of Things. Well, I found several definitions, but I decided the definition that whatis.com provides was probably the most succinct and, to me, good enough. They define the Internet of Things as a scenario in which objects, animals, or people are provided with unique identifiers and the ability to transfer data over a network without requiring human to human or human to computer interaction. In other words, there are certain key features, right, before something qualifies as belonging to the Internet of Things ecosystem. Number one, it's got to have a unique ID. Number two, there's got to be some computational capability. Number three, it's got to be connected to the network. And obviously, in our context today, the mother of all networks is the Internet. Number four, if you've got something with computational ability that is connected to a network and has a unique ID, it doesn't take very much more effort to add in the ability then to have sensors or actuators connected to that node. And apart from these 5 key features, the other elements are in the definition that you don't need human to human instructions or human to machine instructions. In other words, you have an autonomous ecosystem capable of analyzing, responding, and doing things, albeit with some pre-existing instructions when you first started it, but not for every single decision that the nodes in the autonomous system makes. So this is, I would consider it revolutionary. Those who don't consider it revolutionary, I would say just don't get it yet, right? Do you agree? This audience must agree with me on this point. Now, I thought I would bring some toys because, and these are toys that I actually muck around with after midnight because I think it illustrates the points I want to make. First, I said a node has to have a unique ID and has to have some computational ability. Well, my favorite tiny unit of computational ability right now is this. You probably can't see it. This is smaller than my fingernail. In fact, it could actually be much smaller. But this chip is actually a microcontroller. It's the ATtiny 85. Very small amounts of memory, but I can program it. It's just a subset of C. It's got 8 pins, capable of both input and output. I can connect it to a sensor. I can connect it to a relay or the actuator or to a motor. I can make it sense. I can make it do something. I can make it analyze and respond to set patterns. But that's not it, right? That's just a computational unit. Then, oh yeah, by the way, this, if you go to, okay, I've dropped it. It doesn't matter. I was going to tell you why it doesn't matter that I've dropped it. Because if you go to Element 14 and you order 1,000 of them, guess what the price is? It's about $1. Right? So I can afford to drop it. Now, if you look at, so what I did is I connected that. Well, I've got to use these breadboards because I don't have enough time to do all the soldering. If you look at this piece, this is what I think it's a NRF24L01. Basically, it's a transceiver in the 2.4 gigahertz range. How much is this? What do you think? It's in the dollar range. This connected to that little micro controller gives me the ability to have a wireless network. And not just any wireless network, but a mesh wireless network. And not just any mesh wireless network, but even with the appropriate protocols, an IP wireless network. So do you see the point that for $1 or $2, I've got computational capability, unique IP address, wireless connectivity. If you're too lazy to deal with the individual microprocessors, then you could just buy an Arduino. I suppose this will be about $20 or $30, just so you don't have to do any soldering. If you're even lazier than that, you can just pick up a Raspberry Pi, which costs a grand total of $43 as of 2 weeks ago when I ordered some units. And if you need a camera, you can get this infrared Raspberry Pi camera. I think I paid about $40 or $50 for it. And of course, I also connected it to the RF transceiver. Now, what's the point of all this illustration? The point I'm trying to make is this. The price is crashing. The unit price of each node of the Internet of Things, I think, is in the sub $1 range. And I believe this price collapse changes everything. Because if it is so cheap, I can drop it, I can throw it at you, I can scatter it at you, I can install it in every single lamppost in Singapore. If it's comfortable and flexible enough, I can install it in all the underwear that we wear. After all, it's wearable, right? That's why I think the latest estimate, which the next speaker will share with you, is when you talk about the explosion of units in the Internet of Things, you're talking, was it 29 to 30 billion units, right? Now, at that price and at that number, and with that ubiquity, it must change the way we live, work, play, interact, do business, entertain ourselves, socialize, and unfortunately for me, also on politics. Right? There's going to be a revolution there. Now, having said all this, both on the hardware point, the next issue and this is a question which I don't have the answer for, is that I haven't yet figured out who's actually going to win in this revolution. This is what we discussed before I came in just now. Right? We know that there's a major change. We know that computational ability, connectivity, sensing, and control of actuators, the price is tending towards zero. So if you're in this business, if you're in the pure hardware or connectivity business, the problem for you is that your products and services are commoditized. You're not going to make a lot of money from it. So, it's like the poor telcos who today, on his own account, would make an IDD phone call. When you can Skype or use VoIP, who would send an SMS when you can WhatsApp or you use any of the other range of over-the-top messaging systems. So I know there are going to be major losers. I haven't yet figured who's going to win. Maybe this conference will answer it. Now let me change hat now and come back to a public or government perspective. Because the Singapore government anticipates that there's a major revolution going on, the Prime Minister has decided we need to reposition ourselves to catch the next wave. We suspect the revolution in the Internet of Things, in the short term, will have a major impact in a couple of domains. Number one, we think in the whole area of healthcare, personal fitness. The examples of that is people wearing all their, all these watches and health fitness trackers. But the real application there is when you can improve the quality of healthcare, when you can improve compliance with medication, when you can track health outcomes, when you can customize medication and treatment to the individuals. And ultimately, the big political and economic challenge in healthcare is how do we make it cheaper? In the IT industry, Moore's law applies, right? Every 18 months, the number of transistors doubles, or the processing capability doubles, or the connectivity bandwidth doubles. Healthcare has been the one area which so far, and I say this as a doctor and as a previous administrator, is the one area that has resisted all attempts to make it safer, cheaper, and more effective. So this is one area where we do want, one domain where the Singapore government does want to focus and want to highlight to the industry. If you've got solutions which can make our healthcare cheaper, better, faster, safer, more customized, please give us your best deal. That's one domain. The other domain we're looking at is on transport. There's a lot of political angst about transport in Singapore, primarily about car ownership, about overcrowding on buses and trains. If you actually go beyond that, the real challenge in transport is how do we move the most number of people in the shortest time possible to wherever they want to go to. It's actually an engineering and a data problem. How do we engineer our bus services, their interactions with our rail services, and our taxi fleet? We know there's a lot of disruption going on because of Uber and all these other apps. But the real point is, how can I shorten your commute time? And during the time that you spend commuting, how can I keep you sufficiently entertained or educated so that you're not wasting your time on public transport? So this is another area, another domain that's ripe for the plucking. So again, if you've got solutions and answers to that, give us your best offer. The third domain we're looking at is in security. When you have to deal with terrorism, or sometimes even riots, it is inexcusable to say you have no data, no video feeds, no audio feeds of the situation. When drones are cheap, when cameras are cheap, we should be reacting and responding in real time. And it doesn't just mean putting more human eyes on the ground when you've got cameras. And it doesn't just mean a camera that is recording video feeds and dumping it on a hard disk. Today, even your phones have facial recognition technology. We should know in real time who is doing what and who is causing problems and who are the victims and who needs protection. I know this sounds very much like a film, what was that? Minority Report. We don't want to get to that dystopian ideal, but the point I'm making is that in the security space, this is something which the information revolution, and in particular the Internet of Things, will have applications for. The fourth area is obvious, it's logistics. The way we move goods around, the way retail business is conducted. All this is going to be severely disrupted, and again, the sooner our companies and the sooner Singapore is pre-positioned for this, the better. Because otherwise, if you just have lots and lots more of retail malls which all have the same brands and all look alike, when people have already stopped walking and they're just using their fingers to click and buy, you're going to be in a very, very disadvantaged position. The fifth area is related to my day job, which is about the environment. I need to know in real time air quality, water quality, weather, lightning. I need to have these sensors available, distributed, plentiful, generating data which I can use, and not just data for me to use, but that the public will have access to. And that's why we make all these feeds available through data.gov.sg and through API, so that if you don't like the way I present the data, you can write your own apps, your own analytical programs. You can make your own decisions as to whether or not it's safe to play golf or to swim in the swimming pool when you know that there's a lightning strike within 2 kilometers of where you were 2 minutes ago. So that's another domain where providing real-time environmental sensory data will enable appropriate decision-making at a company and at an individual level. So we understand, therefore, that there are some domains which are going to be transformed, for which there are opportunities or risks. If you take a step back from that, the Singapore government's overall strategy to Smart Nation and to the Internet of Things consists of the following elements. Number one, we will make sure we have world-leading infrastructure in Singapore. And the key infrastructure which Internet of Things requires is connectivity. So whether it is 4G or post-4G, if it's going to be tethered connections, it means fiber in every home, ultimately fiber to every node, every lamppost, every traffic control unit, every block, every camera. Whatever it takes, we will continue to invest to make sure we are at the world's leading edge. I came back from Silicon Valley a month ago. I was slightly amused that the bandwidth in most homes there are a fraction of what people in HDB homes in Singapore will get. That's not good enough, but nevertheless, I want to make sure that on infrastructure there should be no question that Singapore is number one, or at worst, number two. Next, open standards. The big problem for the Internet of Things right now is competing standards. So if you make a product, the trouble is companies still try to create walled gardens and try to hide behind proprietary standards, proprietary protocols, and don't make their products open. Well, for those of you who are going to propose solutions to the Singapore government, I will cast a very cynical eye on proposals which try to create walled gardens. So we believe in open standards. Third element, open data. I gave you an example of that. For data which I collect on the environment, it will be open to everyone, because wisdom does not just reside in my ministry. The wisdom to analyze the data, to synthesize the different data streams. I believe We want to be able to use the wisdom of the crowds, or more important than that, the wisdom of experts in the crowd, and hence this belief in open data. Fourth element is that even as we do all this, even as we have the most connected island in the world, even as we subscribe to open standards and have open data, we also realize there is a very real risk of breach of personal privacy and of national security. So even as we do all these things, we will roll out appropriate measures to protect privacy and to protect national security. And I say this, explicitly so that you understand that these are essential. This is the security and protection of privacy is the flip side of the coin for openness and transparency. Because if we just need one major disaster where someone's privacy has been breached or national security has been compromised, and that will set back our efforts to create a more open, transparent architecture for our system. So that's why we have a National Cyber Security Agency led by Minister Yaacob Ibrahim, and it's parked in the Prime Minister's office, just like the Smart Nation Secretariat is parked within the Prime Minister's office. This illustrates the importance that we place on security and privacy. Another way the Singapore government will help catalyze this process, that we will be a reference customer. So if we have domains, and I've already listed some domains just now, which need help or for which applications from industry that you represent would be relevant, make us your best offers, your best ideas, and because you know that we are skeptical, knowledgeable, and demanding customers, if you can con me to buying your product or using your product, you can use that as your calling card in other parts of the world. Another function of government in this area is to support research and development. We have the National Research Foundation, we've got research institutes like the I2R. We will continue to fund research which leads to either the development of new platform technology or the application of these new platform technologies. And we will also offer Singapore to the world as a test bed. So whether it's an autonomous car or a new method for monitoring healthcare outcomes or improvements in public transport, if you've got a good idea, test bed it here, proof of concept, prototype it, upscale it. It's what we did with water. We didn't invent reverse osmosis, but we took it because we had an existential need for water security. We upscaled within a decade our ability to desalinate water and to recycle water. Today, people look at Singapore as a world leader. And it's not just Singapore, but the Singapore companies and Singapore experts in water have a global market because of their success in Singapore. So we want to replicate that story for the Internet of Things and for the information technology professionals in Singapore as well. Some other things which you might see over the next year or two is IDA is working on rolling out a national sensor network, because we know that the individual components of the technology are already there and already so cheap. So we'll be rolling that out. We'll basically be looking for ideas and proposals from you. So expect to see a national sensor pervasive network island-wide. Another example of something which I'm looking at is to have disseminated community smart screens in every block or in every lift lobby. A smart screen which would be able to interact with people who are coming through it. We know who you are, what you want, what information you need. For instance, you take the lift down from your flat, all the bus arrival times so that you don't waste your time going too early or miss it and therefore wait too late. The latest information on news, not just at the national level, but at the community level. So community smart screens, community smart TVs. So these are just some examples of some of the things that we will roll out in the short term to prove and to test these concepts and products and applications which I hope the many people in this room will offer to us. So let me conclude by the story that my staff gave me about two companies, Kodak and Fujifilm. We all know Kodak, and we think of Kodak as cameras and film. But a lot of us have forgotten that, in fact, in 1975, it was a Kodak engineer, Steve Sassoon, who actually created the first digital camera. And it is such a tragedy that in 2012, Kodak had to file for bankruptcy. They invented it, but yet the tsunami of digital photography overwhelmed Kodak. Perhaps because they were too successful with legacy products. They were too good at marketing and branding their legacy products, that they couldn't take the risk of riding the next wave which would cannibalize their own past success. That's a cautionary story for companies and for countries. Fujifilm was a tiny fraction of the market share for film compared to Kodak. But Fujifilm also anticipated that digital photography would overtake film. Actually, Kodak knew that too. However, the difference of Fujifilm was that very early on, they, just like Kodak, decided, well, maybe there's a few more years for film. We'll continue to make money from film, but you better start looking for new fields, using perhaps some technical ability which you already have. So in the case of Fujifilm, for instance, anyone who can make film should have some expertise with chemicals, with nanoparticles. You can create films whether you're making new LCDs or you can create cosmetics for women. Or similarly, you can also leverage some of that expertise to get into other fields like medical equipment, drugs, and Fujifilm also today has a burgeoning business in that. So the cautionary story of these two companies is that having the right idea or even knowing the facts is important, but not enough. We need to understand and to be prepared to make gut-wrenching changes if need be, in order to stay ahead of the curve and to keep relevant. For a small, tiny city-state like Singapore, we are always in a state of existential challenge. So the genius of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew actually has to be replicated, not by one man, because we will never have another Lee Kuan Yew, but collectively the wisdom of the crowd, of all Singaporeans and friends of Singapore, will be needed as we reinvent ourselves and prepare ourselves to ride next wave, the wave of the information revolution and the more recent wavelet within that, called the Internet of Things. Thank you all very much for your attention and your support.